five members of the panel. Yeah, so I'm Ian Appleyard, I'm chairing today, and we have 5 people who very kindly agreed to come along and be on the panel. As many of you may know, we also asked for some questions beforehand. So I've got quite a long list of questions, and unfortunately we won't be able to get through them all. Excuse me. But what I've done is chunk them down into 6 basic groups. So there's 6 themes, and hopefully you'll feel that your question is reflected in someone else's question. You get to know what the answer is. I need to do a little bit of housekeeping just for the panel and to introduce the panel to everyone. So generally for the panel, what I'd like you to do, I will ask questions in general and then direct, but if you have a specific thing that you would like to say about any question, if you could raise your virtual hand, and you do that by the reactions, which is at the bottom right, and it just says raise hand, then I can see that you want to speak. I would also like for the panel just to introduce themselves, so the whole audience can see who's here. Okay, so if it's Tim, if we could start with you first, if you'd like to make yourself known.
Hello.
Hi, Tim. So if it's just a very brief bio, and then we can get
okay. Hello, I'm Tim Davis. I've been in practice for, I forget, but since 1988. Trained at the Leamington College, and then went on to study herbs with Giovanni TCM, and worked with him for a while. And more recently, I've studied the Jing Fang with Susan Roberdew. Yeah, so I have lots of different approaches to treating. So I suppose with COVID, I've been treating, probably like everybody, I've been treating it for about 18 months now, doing a lot of online consultations, initially with herbs, and now seeing a lot of long COVID. So I guess we're all learning about it. So
Sure.
I'm happy to share my experience.
Thank you. So we'll just move on. Michelle Ventner.
Hi.
Hello.
So hi everyone, so I'm Michelle. I trained at the Acupuncture Academy, and after graduating I got invited to be part of a research study for students with mental health, and from there basically evolved this big multi-vet that we now run in Leamington, which now is seeing a lot of long COVID come through the door, which is why I'm here today. So yeah,
excellent.
I won't go into any more.
Thank you very much. Alex Jacobs.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm acupuncturist and a herbalist. Also have a really great interest in yang sheng and Chinese medicine, self-help, Chinese dietary therapy, which is what I've been asked to contribute to today. And I'm also the president of the RCHM. You may well have seen me in some of the COVID sessions.
So I go-to man for certain COVID questions. So Merlin.
Hi.
Merlin Young.
Yeah. Hey, you got me?
We've got you. Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Merlin Young. I'm co-founder of the Moxa Africa charity. I have a particular angle on this from the perception of self-help, moxibustion, daily moxibustion, and I'm very excited by having the opportunity to speak here today because I want to announce a study that we're launching as of today. So I'm hoping I'll be able to tell you about it later.
Brilliant. I'm Michelle Aris. We can't hear you. There's a problem. Is it a mute? I wonder if I could force you unmute.
She's unmuted, Ian, but so it must be on her end, I think.
Ian, she was having difficulties earlier today.
Right.
So Sorry, maybe
we'll-
Michelle, could you leave the meeting and come back in, and we'll bring you back in, and it might work that way.
Yeah.
So you want to carry on, Ian?
Yeah, we'll try and sort it out in the back room, as it were. Okay, we've got an hour, so we've got to go at speed to try and get through things. So what I'm going to do to start off with is, because some questions have come in that are, let's say, just about the prevalence and incidence of COVID, long COVID. So I'm just going to, I've looked at some government information on these, and so I'm just going to answer those questions myself, but then invite the speakers to say whether that is reflected in the people they are seeing, if you see what I mean. So we go from the national stats to see whether that comes down. One other thing that's come through, people have asked, is there a research program involved, and how can we get involved in any research? And is there data being collected? So about 3 or 4 questions come in on that. There is a research program, and those of you here yesterday, you would have seen, hopefully, the talk by Acupuncture, Nick and Spod. So they've set up, and they're working with some people in the States to set up a long COVID research program using their software. So there is very much something you can get involved with if you want to. A couple of slightly related issue, because you may know that the Professional Standards Authority is occupying a lot of my life at the moment, but people have asked about, can you advertise? If people are interested in treating long COVID, but obviously there's no evidence established yet because it's such a new condition. So how do you advertise if you want to do it? It does depend how you phrase it, and you can go to Copy Advice team for that. However, one possibility is, if you're involved in a research project, then you can say, I'm involved in a research project. So that sounds a bit odd, but a way to get around it, where you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, promote that you're interested in treating it, and also help to gather evidence. Okay, so the basic prevalence things, people come in, is like, what age range? Now, the government stats at the moment, although still preliminary, there is a fairly even from 25 to 69. There's not a statistical difference between these groups, although right in the middle seems to be the group most affected. So looking at 25% in each 15-year age block. So generally, there's nothing that particularly stands out in terms of age, and probably reflects something on how many have got it, although the very young tend not to be as affected at the moment, preliminary statistics. The other one, do men get it more than women, or vice versa? And people, I think in the general media, the view is that women are more likely to be affected by long COVID. It seems in reality, there's not such a huge difference as you might perceive from the general media thing. There is a slight difference, but again, it's barely reaching statistical significance. So that's one thing. And then in terms of long COVID, how long does it last? Well, it's currently sort of defined as symptoms beyond 5 weeks, and then another line of symptoms beyond or at 12 weeks. And of people who've had COVID, it seems like up to 10% of people still have a symptom after 12 weeks. Of course, people don't necessarily know what goes on beyond 12 weeks. But considering many, many more people are likely to catch it in the coming months, et cetera, and many people have already had it, 10% of millions of people is a huge amount of people, basically. So it is almost inevitably going to be affecting, coming into your, knocking on your clinic doors in the future. Okay, so I think the first thing I would like to ask is just to the panel, and I'll go around initially in the initial form. So I'll start with Tim, Alex, Michelle. Sorry, I'll start with Tim, Alex, Michelle, and Merlin, and then hopefully the other Michelle will be able to join us. So Tim, in your experience, what's the general demographic of people that are coming through the door? Are they all age ranges or mostly women?
I think in terms of age range, I've seen from 20 to 80, but most of them tend to be maybe over 40, that
Right.
kind of grouping. But I've seen it all the way through, but mostly that. Men rather than women, I hadn't really thought about it actually, but seems to be about even in my practice. Yeah.
Okay. So Michelle Ventnor, since you're there, how have you?
Probably the same as Tim. I'm getting the same sort of like a real wide age band, but I'm getting a lot more men than women. I think I've probably got 80% men to women, but whether is that geographical or is it within the I don't know. So
Right.
but yeah, I'm getting a lot more men coming forward.
And Alex?
I pretty much the same as Tim, I would say. It's seems to match what you're saying with the national statistics.
National. Merlin, how about you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'd say probably the same, fairly random, but there's certainly research data out there that says women are more prone to it, and with the age group 40 to 60 as well. So I'm wondering where these data are coming from.
Oh no, you're right about the 40 to 60, and you're also right about women being more affected. I'm just saying in the general media, the way it's put out, when the bar charts that I've been looking at from February, there's not as large a difference as one might imagine, or I imagined before. So that's really, but yes, that middle age and women, they are slightly, but we're looking at sort of the middle age range is like 25%, and the next group has got 23%. So it's not a huge disparity.
It's interesting for me because you know the each demographic has slightly different aspects in terms of their inflammatory responses at different ages. So there could be something significant. It'd be interesting to really get good data on that.
Yeah. So Michelle, Aris, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Could you just tell us about yourself as well, briefly as well? So.
Okay, so I'm Michelle. I trained in TCM at the University of Westminster, and about 14 years ago I qualified, and in more recent years I've been studying within the lineage of Jeffrey Wen and Cecil Sturman. My mentor is Hong Tran, and so I'm coming from that classical perspective.
I'm not sure how much you caught, but I was just the main first kickoff.
Oh, I caught it all. I was listening.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So what's the demographic spread in your experience?
I mean, I've had a range of ages. I wouldn't say that I've seen enough clients to be able to draw conclusions because, you know, who can afford to come to your clinic, for example, might, you know, that's a big affects the demographic in a wide way. But the fact that everybody's seeing a spread of ages indicates to me that age isn't the most important factor, and that it could affect anybody whose resources are taxed. I've heard of teenagers suffering from long COVID. If they're emotionally stressed, they're not eating a nourishing diet, they're staying up late, overuse of screens, that's taxing their resources, and then they're much more likely, these people are the ones that are likely to suffer from long COVID, in my view.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so the next sort of general theme is pattern identification. So perhaps surprisingly, a couple of people have written in and said, what are the main syndromes? What are the common patterns associated with long COVID? So I'm going to keep in the same order. So Tim, have you got patterns or stand out for you?
I think it's, I don't think there is a common theme for me anyway. But I think one of the things that is the obvious things like damp and phlegm and damp heat initially, But I think one of the things I've really noticed is the dryness, so the body fluid deficiency and the blood deficiency in long COVID. So there's all the obvious things that happen during COVID with pneumonia and infection and everything. But I think, yeah, probably the body fluid, the yin, and the blood deficiency I've noticed in long COVID.
So Michelle Ventnor.
Pretty much the same. And then the only thing that's been really interesting, I've had quite a few clients that've got there's a real kidney chi deficiency going on there. And actually some of them have had to have further medical tests, and they've actually got quite dramatic reduced function of their kidneys.
Right.
Which I find interesting. So you've got the kidney kind of lung relationship going on there. If the kidneys aren't holding it down, then it's the lungs are retaining. So yeah, I found quite a few the kidneys need a lot of strengthening.
Right.
As well as everything else that Tim said. But again, I don't seem to have two people the same, actually. I don't think,
right.
Like Tim said, there's no real pattern. Everyone's different.
So Alex.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of variation, but I think it really gives the body a big whack. So the yang, the qi, the blood, long-term blood stasis as well, obviously, is a big issue. And so balancing those things in restoration, you have to be aware of, sometimes you might want to do one strategy, but it's going to be too taxing. And so I think staging is quite important in treatment, because you might want to do something, but you may have to build the body up to a certain extent before you can do it. So that's one thing I would say. There's the loss of taste and smell thing as well, that's sometimes a little bit tricky to treat. I've treated it successfully once with acupuncture, actually, but it's that I think that there's quite a lot of, it can be quite spleen stomach focused, a lot of the stuff, and I think that's something to be aware of. And then I think this refers to one of the questions that have been brought up, but there's also the question of lingering pathogens as well. So yeah. I think that you can't ignore that, and something that might look like deficiency can actually be a still active pathogen.
So Merlin, what do you feel for this?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I wonder whether any patterns that emerge, might be an explanation why they're so varied, is because you could what we'd hope is that there's an underlying pattern that's kind of causative in this, but actually possibly the patterns that are emerging are actually an effect of the body, I think, as Tim said, of being whacked. And so I'd agree. I don't think there's anything that's uniform in anybody I've seen.
Okay, thank you. And Michelle, Aris?
So I would say that many people encounter the COVID pathogen without becoming sick at all, which indicates that their Wei Qi is strong. So if someone's become sick with COVID and then been unable to fully expel the pathogen, leading to long COVID, we can assume that there's some deficiency of Wei Qi. In my understanding, Wei Qi is supported by several components, of which kidney yang and stomach fluids are particularly important. So that leads back to what you were saying, Tim and Michelle, patterns that you've noticed with your clients. Kidney yang is important for Wei Qi because it provides the energy necessary to produce the sneeze, the fever, and the cough necessary to expel a pathogen, and stomach fluids allow the patient to sweat. So these are mechanisms the body uses to expel a pathogen. So if your clients have long COVID, I would certainly check this status of kidney yang and stomach fluids. Once the pathogens breach the exterior and the body hasn't had the resources to expel the pathogen, in our understanding, the body will often try to hold the pathogen in latency at the level of the yuan, the constitutional level, in places like the joints, because there they have access to the Jing, which is cold, quiet, slow. And that's to prevent the pathogen from reaching the deeper viscera. But that storage doesn't come for free and draws upon the yin resources, particularly that's the blood and the fluids. So I think, Alex, you mentioned that. If those resources are plentiful, latency will be successful and symptoms won't be experienced. But once those resources are taxed, the pathogen starts to move out of latency and we start to see symptoms. So if your patient is experiencing symptoms of long COVID, it's likely that they might have a deficiency of blood and or fluids. And so I would suggest nourishing liver blood and harmonizing the spleen and stomach.
Okay, thank you. So the second sort of part of the pattern differentiation theme, if you like, is some people did actually write in, I think Alex alluded to at least one of them, with specific ideas with respect, and we've touched on two. So Jing Ba Mai, so the extraordinary vessels. So there's a question basically, have you reached for the extraordinary vessel blocker, I suppose, in treating long COVID? The role of blood stasis, and also whether it's a lingering pathogenic factor, and should we treat along those lines? So I know some of you have touched on that already, but if we we'll go around the circle again to allow others to put in their 2 pennies worth. So Tim, what would you say are these three? Are these things that strike you, I guess?
So the extra meridians, definitely. I use Xiao Yang, so the opening and couple points, and a lot of the time, I'm working with the Xiao Yang and also with the Jing Fang herbs as well. So I try and match it up with acupuncture. Triple burner 5, gallbladder 41, and then I support Ren 6, stomach 36. So I'm trying to harmonize clear heat plus support the Zeng Qi. So I also use the Ren and the Du quite a lot, extra meridians, when people are very depleted. Yeah. So like when people are really like, they can hardly get into the clinic, they're very, very depleted. Those channels I've found really helpful, and leaving with other points in with that, but leaving it in for like half an hour to really open them up, and that does start to lift the energy a bit. So that's been helpful. And recently, I've been using the Chong Mai a lot for anxiety. So rebellious qi in the Chong Mai, that's unrooted qi. So tonifying the blood and the qi and opening the Chong Mai to kind of bring the energy down. So that's more recent because there's so much anxiety with it.
So your use of the Xiao Yang, is that in relation to lingering pathogens, or is it just what you're finding useful?
Yes, I mean, because it's the half exterior, half interior. So it's when that's when people are a bit stronger and the pathogens got stuck at that level. So to clear it as well as tonify the underlying qi. So I found that very useful, and herbally I found it very useful as well. Okay. But with herbs, you can add other things in, like there's usually a lot of full heat with that, or even empty heat, and then you can start to modify the formula. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Michelle?
I haven't done any of the extraordinary vessels or anything with my patients. I've tended to do more of sort of like 5-element block clearances. So your aggressive energy drains have been really, really good, which is my first go-to treatment really. And then seeing what kind of comes up on the needles there. And then the entrance and exit blocks are a massive thing for me, especially that liver lung block and then around that long COVID kind of area. And then obviously for those patients that can have it, Moxa. So really try and treat the blood that's stuck. But I can't comment on the extraordinary vessels. I've not gone there yet.
Thank you. So Alex, do you want to wax a bit more lyrical about blood stasis or pathogens?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's again, I think I just want to reiterate that with you got to look at the condition of your patient, and if they're very weak, if you want to, whatever you're using, acupuncture or herbs, you have to be quite careful about being too aggressive with wanting to get to the moving the blood stasis, because they're very deficient, either in blood or yin or yang, qi. That could really set them back. And I think it's really about identifying where they are at the moment. And also bear in mind that actually, if for example, they're very yang deficient, if you restore their yang, that could take care of the blood stasis in itself. So I think looking at it as a primary thing, I think it's something that you can wait a little bit, unless it's something that, again, you could identify that it's actually something that's blocking their progress. But I think that you have to look at how robust they are. So that would be my main idea, really, about that. I think for the extraordinary channels, I just agree. Moxa is a really great way to go. And then someone else was actually just asking in the chat about, is it too late to cut ladder 12? And I think it's really where the pathogen is in the body and the mode of the person. I think it was Michelle, you were saying about having to have the energy to actually push the pathogen out, to have the sweat, to have the fluids too. And if you don't, not only could it be counterproductive to do ladder 12 at that time, but it won't be very active. I mean, we all know the feeling of when a point is active. It's the kind of point that you put a needle in or do something with, and something happens automatically because it's kind of ready to go. And if the body is in a more depleted state, if it's not really ready to go, not much might happen if you do bladder 12 at that point. However, if the person is exhibiting those more exterior symptoms, and if the pathogen is in that layer, then yeah, bladder 12 is appropriate. It's just deciding when.
Okay, just before we go to Merlin, when you talk about blood stasis, are there specific signs and symptoms that you see with long COVID people you think, yeah, this is classic blood stasis, or are you kind of trying to look behind the veil a little bit about what's going on?
Well, people obviously come with chest pain, heart issues, peripheral pain as well, or numbness. That's something that people come with. But again, I think it stands differentiation. Not only is it, you should not primarily just jump to blood stasis on those things. It could be some blood stasis there, but bear in mind that if you have severe lung qi deficiency or lung stagnation, you can still get chest pain from that without going to blood stasis. And also just thinking about the complex as well. So you're treating the whole thing rather than just going for blood stasis. However, I think clearly and through experience, blood stasis is certainly a feature with many people with COVID, and particularly long COVID. So we wouldn't want to ignore it.
Brilliant, thanks. So Merlin, what we?
Yeah, I think I very, very much agree with Alex when he's talking about trying to do too much. I think it's little and often, and this is tough to treat. I'm quite convinced of it. I'd also want to just add one thing about if you're trying to sort of expel a pathogen, you've got to know where it is really. And I think one of the things with long COVID appears to be that it could be anywhere. It finds a nice little place in the body to hide. There's some very good, interesting research recently from the States which suggests that part of the spike protein from the coronavirus persists in monocytes, in very mobile monocytes in the body. If this is corroborable, it's a very, very interesting finding, because these monocytes can basically find their way anywhere in the body, including crossing the blood-brain barrier, which might explain one of the key symptoms, which is this awful brain fog that people suffer from. Right. So when we're trying to expel, we've got to basically, I think, fortify the body to push the pathogen out from within rather than go looking for it. But to go back to the first part of the question, the extra vessels, again, that's interesting. Very early on, we were casting around to people that we wanted to find out advice. What's their idea? What would their best way of trying to unlock this using Moxa would be? And two people who I have great respect for, but who have got a particularly herbal aspect on it, went for the Xiao Yang, which very much corroborates what Tim's saying. In actual fact, we're testing 4 protocols, and one of the protocols is actually an extra vessel protocol, and we're actually not using Xiao Yang or we're using the Ren and Yin Chao and the Zhong Yin Wei, the opening couple points, using Moxa on both of them. So it could be, and one of the reasons we've gone for that is because we've got anecdotal evidence that that has helped.
Right.
So,
Okay.
so yeah.
Thank you. So Michelle, next Michelle Aris. So what do you feel for the extraordinary vessels, blood stasis, or lingering pathogen?
So I have used the Yang Wei Mai to treat long COVID patients because this channel helps to reconcile the movement of Yang on the exterior in the form of Wei Qi with the supply of kidney Yang from the interior. Because if this fails to be coordinated, the pathogens can breach the exterior. And this channel is particularly indicated for patients with Xiaoyang type conditions, whether there's excess or deficiency of Wei Qi. However, in practice, I've found that the divergent channels tend to be more useful than Yang Wei Mai in long COVID cases. That's because those with long COVID do tend to be deficient in the yin resources, and divergent channels can be used to nourish the yin humors as well as working with the Wei Qi level at the same time. So I've actually found that using Yang Wei Mai creates a lot of Yang movement, and if the underlying yin humors are deficient, this can cause a lot of upheaval for the client, while they don't actually have the capacity to support a full healing crisis. So the upshot is I would only advise using Yang Wei Mai, which is my understanding of working with Xiaoyang conditions in the 8 extra realm, in cases where you're confident the client has built enough strength in yin to support a healing event.
Okay, thank you. Right.
I've got a perspective on blood stasis as well, and the other question, but I don't know how much time we've got. So.
Well, maybe we'll come back to it. I'm just really trying to get an even spread, I suppose, because the next thing is specific symptoms, and it may encompass what you want to do. A number of people have written in, obviously, to ask the classic specific symptoms, or what I think commonly known, which is loss of taste and loss of smell. But you've also got a couple of questions about floaters, seeing floaters, and giddiness. So I think if we can go around the circle once more, and just like the main question, I think, is how have you set about addressing loss of taste, loss of smell, but a subsection of if you've had people with giddiness or floaters, how have you dealt with that? So start with Tim again, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So loss of taste and smell, I see it as a neurological symptom. So it seems that COVID can go very deep in the body, and that's an early symptom that comes. So it seems to kind of have a spread through all the layers of the body. But when that's involved, taste and smell, I think neurological. So I don't really treat it specifically. I just treat the person and treat what I can. And then it tends to kind of recover as the person recovers. That's my experience. So I don't do anything specific, but from a herbal point of view, I do look at the neurological level and herbs that affect that level. So it tells me how deep it's gone, basically. Floaters and giddiness, yeah, this, from my point of view, this is blood deficiency. A lot of the dizziness, severe dizziness that I'm seeing is blood deficiency, and the floaters is blood deficiency. So sometimes the giddiness can be other things like phlegm or damp or, rising qi, unrooted qi, but a lot of the time I'm finding it's blood deficiency. So I treat the blood deficiency.
Okay. So Michelle?
So loss of taste and smell's a big one, and then obviously the extreme fatigue is what I seem to be getting the majority of people are coming through the door with, and a lot of them are really fit sort of professional sports people as well, who have just been, like Alex said, hit with a brick. So that's the biggest things I seem to be treating. I haven't really had many dizziness, but interestingly as well, I'm thinking about it now, I've had a lot more people come through the door with Meniere's disease. So yeah, Merlin's nodding there. So again, is this another thing that's connected? Because I think this year alone, I've had probably double the numbers of people that you'd see with, and again, all ages being hit with Meniere's, and again, it's the dizziness, it's the vertigo. Loss of taste and smell. Again, I just treat 5-elementally with the blocks and things, but we have been doing a little protocol for, and I think it's worked on a couple of patients. So Bitong, large intestine 20, and then do 26, leaving them in for evens. But Alex, you might be able to say about this. Recently, a colleague of mine has said that it's, whether there's research, I'm not sure. So this is just throwing it out there, but she's been telling patients to take chelated zinc to do with the cells within the nose and the mouth, but I'm not no nutritional expert. So
we have a zinc question coming up.
Okay.
Hold the
Okay.
zinc. Okay, hold the zinc. But thank you. So Alex,
I'm more of a Chinese Dachi therapist,
we've got Chinese
enthusiast rather than the Western.
We've got herbs coming up as well.
But yeah, so I don't really know about the zinc, I'm afraid. But what on the question of lost taste and smell, I did actually have a patient, and I had quite a dramatic result with, and I predominantly use bladder 7, which is classically indicated for opening the nose, and 765 I used. Interestingly, that was her only symptom. She was I think 16, so young lady, and she had quite a lot of fullness in the upper. I could feel the heat in the upper back, and she'd get headaches. And her lung pulse was quite strong, and so it seemed like there was a build-up of, for her at least, there was a build-up of heat in the exterior, in the upper back, in the head, coming down, and she would get pain here. So it all kind of fit as something, well, bladder 7, and then I did do 14, and I did yin shang, large intestine 20, and within the day it was coming back to normal, which was, but she hated it. She's never had acupuncture before, and she hates me. She doesn't never want it again, but it fixed the problem. Okay. So that was quite interesting. In terms of, I think that, again, I'll come back to stomach and spleen with the loss of taste and smell. Nutritionally, in Chinese perspective, you want things that are going to open the orifices. So all the aromatics, all of the classic kind of garden variety herbs and aromatics, like oregano and I think, and things like that. Mint, you can use wasabi, horseradish. Those particularly go to the nose, so you can just give them a go.
Okay, so Merlin.
Yeah, I want to preface what I've got to say first by saying that there is a massive range in the sort of perception of symptoms. So I think the WHO lists, I think it's 16 symptoms. It's increased, but it's relatively low. I think it might have been UCL lists 29 symptoms, and I came across one study that lists 105 symptoms associated with long COVID that cross across 10 different organ systems. And honestly, I don't think I can name 10 different organ systems. So kind of like that gives you an idea of just how extensive the symptoms are. But one of the things appears to be that the fact that some symptoms resolve more naturally than others, and some symptoms really stick around. And actually, it appears that dizziness and the anosmia are two symptoms that do tend to resolve within 3 to 6 months. So we've got a very good chance of helping them clear. It's the long-standing symptoms that we've got the big challenges with, I think, and there's quite a few of them out there. So,
okay. Thank you. So, Michelle.
So I'll focus my answer on dizziness, but really it can apply to all symptoms. Yes, I have treated patients that have presented with dizziness as part of their long COVID. But I'd argue we're not here to treat those symptoms, those individual symptoms. We're here to treat the person, Alex, like you said. Instead of focusing on how to get rid of the giddiness, let's use the giddiness along with all the other signs and symptoms to help us understand these 3 things. 1, where the pathogen is lodged in the body. 2, what resources are being called upon to prevent that pathogen from moving more deeply? And 3, what the body is doing, if anything, to try to expel that pathogen. Then we can use our needles to help nourish the relevant resources and support the healing processes. So, for example, and I think I'm maybe reiterating maybe what you said, Alex, that giddiness could indicate, for example, that the sensory orifices are obstructed by phlegm, which is preventing clearance of the pathogenic factor. It could indicate a deficiency of blood, as the blood's being utilized to help hold the pathogen in latency. Or it could indicate an uprising of yang due to the obstruction of the lower jiao by an accumulation of damp heat, or it could be other things. But all these things are patterns that we might expect to see in a condition that's becoming chronic. So all symptoms, I would argue, must be understood within the context of the entire process of disease and healing. And it's that process that we're working with, regardless of the medical diagnosis.
Right, okay, well, thank you. Just to go back, because I bothered to look it up, the general top symptoms for long COVID are in order of the top 5: fatigue, cough, headache, loss of taste, and myalgia. Now, the fatigue one comes in like 13% of all people with long COVID. That's beyond 5 weeks at least. So that still leaves about 50% of people with long COVID who've got a symptom that's not one of those, if you see what I mean. So that speaks to the notion that long COVID is a very mixed bag in how it's affecting people. I'm going to add in one question because I'm personally interested. It's a joy of being a chair, I guess. It's just, I think it was Michelle just mentioned that seeing a lot of fit professional sports people getting this condition, which I guess contrasts with the classic theory of it being a weakness of our Wei Qi, of our body's defenses. And this is certainly something that I've heard before from other people, that the people who've got long COVID were, until COVID hit, actually pretty active. So I'm just going to go around and your thoughts on that, starting with Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people that are very fit aren't necessarily healthy from our point of view. And I think that a lot of training, and I've seen it many times, like, extreme athletes deplete their body fluids and their yin, and they use their blood for building muscles. So when COVID comes along, I think it can exploit those layers, basically. So whereas it's not necessarily obvious, when you look at someone, I think that, if we saw these people before they came in, from our point of view, we could take the pulse and we would have a broader perspective of their energy and their system. So yeah, I've seen that a lot. People that are fit at one level, but really get long COVID. And also, these are certain personalities. This is a bit of a generalization, but they're used to pushing through. And when you get long COVID, you can't push through. You've got to rest. And so as a personality, they're not used to that. So they're used to just going through the pain barrier, finding more resources. And one thing I've learned about long COVID is that people can't do that. They have to pace themselves. And in fact, as soon as they overdo it, everything comes back. So, I mean, that would be my initial impressions on that one.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Michelle?
I completely agree with Tim. I think even though they are coming in as fit and they're completely shocked they've been hit by this illness, and actually quite a lot of them didn't even seem to have really bad COVID. They had mild symptoms.
Yeah.
And it seems to have then hit them. But then the biggest nightmare is, obviously, these are the kind of people that don't want to sit around and wait for the body to heal itself. They then oh, I feel great, you've done something really good, and then they decide to go for a half marathon and they come back to square one, and you're kind of like, so again, it's like treating the whole person. But were they deficient, like Tim said before, because they were running themselves, they were pushing themselves to the max prior to actually, you know, were the adrenals running? You don't know, do you really? But they can be, yeah. So I do think I'm seeing a lot more. I'm seeing different ranges of people, but there are a lot of people coming in that were really, really, you know, on the fitness healthy scale. So
okay, just in the interest of time, I don't know if Alex, Merlin, or the other Michelle want to add to that, or you're just general agreement. Merlin.
Definitely. Yeah, I've got a couple of comments very quickly. I'll be as quick as I can. The first thing is, of course, very active people, it's much more noticeable. That crash is so noticeable. So it's a more sort of acute condition for them. But the second thing, I'll come back to these immune cells that appear to be being sort of occupied by spike protein. And these immune cells, these monocytes, are actually activated by exercise. So it actually provides an explanatory model of exactly what happens. Basically, these immune cells are maybe okay, but as soon as you exercise, they explode. So I think there's that, potentially that's an aspect of it as well.
Okay, thanks. Oh, both. Sorry, I should have just stuck to the normal formula. Alex,
I actually just wanted to before the end, I just wanted to ask Merlin about his Moxa, and because you mentioned self Moxa, I just wondered what form of Moxa you get people to do, Merlin.
Do you want me to answer that now, Ian? Is that okay?
You can answer it later if you like.
I've got a lifestyle and advice section. I'll put it in that.
Okay,
all right.
Great.
Okay. So the other Michelle, did you want to?
Yeah, just a very brief point. Totally agree with what you were saying, Tim Davis, about people who seem really fit and healthy, not necessarily got all their resources in place from a Chinese medicine perspective. But back to your point, Ian, about there being such a varied range of symptoms for long COVID. I think what long COVID does is it really reveals the deficiencies of the individual. That's why the symptoms are so varied, because, you know, like for example, with the athlete, they seem fit and healthy, but long COVID, when it hits them, reveals where they're actually depleted in their body. And it's that's what's giving rise to this wide range of symptoms throughout the population.
Okay, great. So next section is a little bit of an interlude, a kind of straightforward question. So a number of people just wanted to know whether long COVID is similar to ME, post-viral fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome. So what do you think? Start with Tim again.
So yeah, I think there are similarities. I mean, I've treated ME for years and years and years, but it's sort of ME plus, because ME normally is some combination of dampness and phlegm lodged at some level in the body, plus some stomach and spleen deficiency. I mean, this is generalized, but it doesn't seem to have, like I've seen with COVID, all sorts of things, like the neurological symptoms, like also the autoimmune system that we haven't even mentioned that, but I noticed that with some COVID, it's their autoimmune system is getting overstimulated. And that's a whole other topic, but and also, you know, skin conditions I'm seeing, the heart, everyone's mentioned that, I'm seeing that, the brain fog, the gynecological symptoms, the disrupted menstrual cycles, everything. So it does share some things, but it's just more. Yeah, it seems to affect other layers. So within the 6 syndromes, it seems to affect any of the layers. Whereas post-viral symptom, in my experience, you can sort of identify it a bit better. Yeah, that's just my experience.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah. I agree with Tim, actually. Yeah, I think it does. In fact, I've got a couple of patients who prefer to say they've got post-viral fatigue rather than long COVID. I think it's like a psychological thing there that they, but again, like Tim, everybody's who walks through your clinic, I don't think you can pigeonhole them into one category. Every single one of them needs to be seen as an individual and trying to work out exactly what it is for them that's causing the issues.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is similar.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I agree with Tim and Michelle. I would just say that there's a slight advantage that we have because we know what the virus is. We know it's COVID, and we're learning about it, which makes these kind of conversations helpful because even though there is a wide variation of presentation, you must treat what's in front of you and all of that. There are some little things you can pick out, which are features of this, which we know, which can help us. So that's just one slight difference from general ME or something like that.
Okay. Merlin?
I wouldn't want, I just agree 100%.
Okay. Not enough arguments here, I think, still. Michelle?
I would say let's beware of matching Western medical diagnoses with Chinese diagnosis. But I do think ME and both post-viral fatigue do carry hallmarks of pathogens that have failed to be fully expelled by the body against a background of underlying deficiency. And therefore, we can draw parallels between these presentations and that of long COVID. So implying a deficiency of Wei Qi, a deficiency of yin humors, and all these diseases tend to have a tendency to present intermitting symptoms as the patient's resources move in and out of taxation. For example, when the patient's under stress, they're menstruating, they've had a late night, the symptoms can worsen, but when they're well rested and looking after themselves, they may feel fine. So all imply that there's pathogens are being held in latency.
So I'll try and speed it up because we will overrun a wee bit, but just going to sort of in the treatment strategy, if you like, some thoughts from you all. Frequency of treatment is one. I know you've touched on it quite a bit, not necessarily directly, but how to balance clearing and tonifying and how you go along those, and how not to get caught up in chasing symptoms. So sort of as a viewing, you're obviously treating for a while, or I guess you're treating for a while. How do you balance not to get chasing symptoms, clearing and tonifying, and what do you feel is the best way to go about frequency of treatment? So Tim.
Yeah, so clearing and tonifying, this is the $1 million question for like any patient really. But I think with long COVID, it's more crucial because sometimes something can look like a deficiency and it's an excess and the other way around. So I don't know, for example, someone with a very rapid pulse, you know, I might think, well, this is full heat, but it may well be empty heat coming from the deficiency. So with a normal patient, if I cleared heat and it wasn't quite right, it would, you know, you'd get away with it. But with a long COVID, if you clear an excess and it's not there, they'll really suffer. So I tend to go very easy. And for these people, I would tend to say I cleared, just did a simple treatment. I'd ask them to come in a couple of days just to really monitor what's going on, because I wouldn't want them to have a week feeling depleted. So yeah, you have to be really on it with that, I think, and go easy. I think a lot of people have said that, so, and I agree with that. Frequency of treatments, if I'm monitoring someone closely, I'll see them 2-3 times a week. If they can get in, I think at least weekly, and go easy, do it in steps. Chasing symptoms, I think, yeah, just stick with you know, your training and what you know about underlying causes and pathogens. Yeah.
Okay,
that's me. Yeah.
So Michelle?
So most of my patients have been coming, because I'm in a multi-bed, it's probably a little bit easier for them to get in a little bit more regular for a cost sort of point. Some of the ones that have had the best results, I would say, were able to come in twice a week. definitely once weekly, and the ones obviously twice a week, they were feeling so much better quicker. Like with Tim, but I'll tend to, again, like I said, treat from a 5-element point of view. So I'll go in with the AE drain first, and then see what comes up with that, and just try and take a gentle approach. Followed that by then obviously feeling the pulses, entry and exit blocks. Like I said before, big one that comes up a lot is the liver lung block. So you want to then tonify liver 14 and tonify lung 1, which has quite an effect on those people that get in that chesty kind of area. But I'll just take it again, like I said, sometimes less is more. You don't want to add a massive cocktail in there for them. You know, they're already fighting something. So my approach is to go in gently and just treat them as mild as possible. But again, I try not to get too down the rabbit hole of symptoms. You know, feel the pulses, see what's going on that day.
Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, I agree with everything said. I think it is tricky. You know, I'm an acupuncturist and a herbalist. Herbs have the advantage that the patient can be doing something every day. And acupuncture, you know, you could get people coming in frequently. But of course, if people are really tired, then it's coming in can be a bit of an ordeal as well. It's really tricky. I think that self-help is a really big aspect of this, which is why I asked Merlin earlier about his techniques. I think you know, things like self-Moxa, self-acupressure, dietary therapy, all of those things are not only things that people can be making little bits of progress every day, but also it's quite empowering and reassuring, and also helps with the people who are you know, itching to get better. You know, who find it very difficult to relax. They've got something to focus on. They've got something positive they can be doing. So I would say, yeah, self-help's important.
Okay, so Merlin?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with no more arguments again. I'm afraid.
Fine.
But
I
think it's basically it's supportive therapy. I think we should treat every case as deficient, which means treat with great care. And and for me, it's if I can, I mean, be seeing a patient maybe twice a week, but if I can, I'd want him to do home Moxa.
Yeah. Okay, so Michelle?
I would say, if in doubt, focus on tonifying the deficient resources, because when the resources are sufficient, the body may well mount a healing event on its own without any help from the needles. And if we try to expel the pathogen when the resources are weak, the treatment's unlikely to be successful and create a lot of discomfort for the client. But I would say that it is important to keep the pathways open, i.e. ensure the bowels are moving daily and ensure the sinuses are clear. So when the body is able to, it can clear the pathogen when it's ready to do so.
Okay, so I'm rather conscious that we have run over the time. I just blame everyone for putting in some interesting questions. We did have a few more to go, which is the one on mental health, which I thought would have, but I think Alex has slightly touched on that. And then the use of herbs, whether or not we need to use herbs and or vitamins, or whether vitamin deficiency was part of the initial problem, and lifestyle advice. So in super speed time, I give you all a chance to make comments on how to look after people's mental well-being in this situation, the need for herbs, the need for vitamins or the lack of vitamins causing it, and any other lifestyle advice. So go from the top again, Tim.
Okay, just quickly then, mental health. Yeah, it's massive. I think with this, it's been a big shock. And I think just in the context of the last 18 months and all the stresses and strains. And I think because this is new for practitioners and for patients, they don't know how to handle it. So it's like, I find a big part of my work is actually almost like educating people on pacing themselves, on the cyclical nature of the symptoms. I mean, sometimes they just circle back in a few weeks' time and nothing's really triggered it. So to give people some kind of context to base what they're experiencing on. So trying to stop the anxiety or try help them with the anxiety that goes with the unknown, basically. I mean, there's loads of things to say. I'm sure other people say things. Herbs, well, I'm a herbalist, so I use herbs. I find it's really helpful, but I've also treated people with just acupuncture, so it's not exclusively herbs. And I'm not really qualified to talk about vitamins and minerals, but I'm sure other people are.
Michelle?
Yeah, so same as Tim, the biggest one is telling people to actually start listening to themselves and listen to their bodies. And for me, again, I've seen a lot of mental health, especially with these people that have been fit as a fiddle and, you know, never stop doing anything. Suddenly they're hit to the floor and they can't do anything. And for them, I think it's a real shock. And then they don't do the exercise that they used to doing that would be part of their mental health routine. But the biggest thing for me is actually trying to educate those people that actually they need to stop and listen to what's going on. And even though they might be feeling a little bit better, to then not go and burn themselves out again. I haven't got a clue about herbs, so I'll leave that to Tim and Alex. So yeah, and just maintaining that they've got a healthy diet. But I do sometimes, like, you know, ear seeds on Shen Men for those that might be a little bit more, you know, anxious for sort of home things. Maybe do a Moxa stick if they need to for home as well, which I'm keen to learn about.
I'm going to have to be a wee bit rude because I just want to.
I'm done.
Sorry, it's not for you, not for you. So Alex, Merlin, and the other Michelle, we'll cut it there. But I do want to give Merlin a brief chance to talk about his herb research. So if you could go with that, and then we'll pretty much wrap it up.
I'll be very, very quick. Can I share a screen?
Yes, you can give it a whirl.
Let me give it a go. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Can you see that? It's
yes.
A poster. Yeah, brilliant. So while I'm talking, you can read this. Basically, we're launching this. We're basically testing 4 different Moxa protocols, trying to compare them for 100 days. So we're as of today, we're starting inviting enrollments. So for 100 days, we're asking people with long COVID to Moxa themselves daily using small cone direct Moxa. This is the same techniques that we used with Moxa Africa for treating tuberculosis. We got very good results. I mean, really good results in terms of what appeared to be a strong immune response, recovery from a disease which is really difficult to recover from, and it's slow stuff with TB. So there's some certain similarities, a lot of differences as well, but a lot of similarities. So basically, we're asking people to apply. There's an email address at the bottom there. If you know anybody, or if you've got long COVID yourself, but if you know anybody who might be interested, please encourage them to get in touch, and we'll take it from there. We'll supply the Moxa, we'll supply lighting tapers, and we'll supply full details about how to do it in a way which will be perfectly safe. So that's it. That's my spiel.
Absolutely brilliant. And just a reminder, for the other research projects, AccuTrack is up and running and having a thing. So if you look to yesterday's talk, I think these will all be up. So there's contacts there if you're interested in being involved in treating for long COVID. And they don't necessarily have to be one or the other. I'm sure you can do both. Okay. I know people are putting questions, but I'm sorry we have run out of time. So apologies for that, but thank everybody for being on the panel and for all the questions. I've really enjoyed it, and I think it should be over to Jennifer now to close down the whole proceedings.